All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome to this exciting conversation we're going to have today between Than and Jake. So to give you guys the background of what's going on here, so Than posted a video on Friday on two powers in heaven, going through a lot of the theology of Second Temple Judaism throughout the Hebrew Bible, New Testament, about various passages we would say support a Trinitarian outlook, and mainly looking over two powers in heaven. This various passages where it talks about two beings or two persons, I guess would be a better term, that refer to God. Yet the Bible teaches there's one God. So Jake has some disagreements with that. He is a Muslim, so obviously he's not going to agree. And so we just decided over the weekend to just let him have a little conversation here about this. Now, this is not going to be like a formal debate. So we're not going to have like timed opening statements. I'm just going to let it. It's basically just going to be open dialogue. So they're going to have a conversation. I'm just going to try to moderate and stay out of it as best I can, and let them hash these things out. So yeah, we'll do that for a little while. I'm going to jump in probably maybe 45 minutes to an hour and do some super chats. So if you guys have any questions for either of these two gentlemen, let me know and I will read those out. So go and get those in now, because if you get them in now, then you're more likely to get yours answered, because I don't want to keep these guys here too long as it is. For Jake, it's like pretty late where he is at. So we're not going to really go past like 2 hours, give or take. Because, I don't want to. This is not a David Wood stream where we go for 4 freaking hours. Okay. We like to get some sleep in occasionally.
I am running on like an hour or two of sleep. So
got it. So real quick, I'll just get these first ones here just to sort of lighten the mood. You think aliens are real? They are saying it is. So Than, do you think aliens are real?
I haven't looked at this stuff, but I'm skeptical about all the news. What about you, Jake?
What about you, Jake?
I would say probably the same thing. I haven't looked at much of anything at all. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that aliens could exist from a theological point of view, but I haven't seen any like good physical evidence of it.
Yeah, I would just say the way they are defining aliens in these reports can be extraterrestrials or beings from, I'm not making this up. This is what they're saying, beings from other dimensions. So by that logic, all Christians and Muslims technically believe in aliens if you define alien so broadly. Because then you're just, of course, we believe in angels and demons, or Muslims also believe in jinn. So you have that going on. So that would not be a problem, I think, for either religion if it turned out there were beings beyond Earth that existed. In fact, if you go into the Bible, there's even different species, it seems. Like you have the Ophanim, Seraphim, you have cherubim, which are like throne guardians, but still seem to be a different category than the Seraphim. Then you have some that appear human-like, but that's it. So with that, why don't you guys just take it from here? Let's talk about two powers in heaven. Do we have Trinitarian theology before Nicaea? I titled this, Is the Trinity a Late Invention? So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. As far as I'm aware, you guys can correct me. Than's taking the position we have Trinitarian theology and beliefs before Nicaea. And Jake, if you can correct me if you're wrong, you're taking the position that that's when that belief emerges.
Yeah, roughly. Although Than and I had a private conversation, it might be a little bit more technical than that, but basically. So I think a good idea, because I don't want to just, especially for my audience, I don't want to just assume that people watched Than's video. I know that Michael kind of summarized it, but I would like maybe to start there with Than, maybe you kind of summarizing what you were trying to portray in the video, just like a couple minute summary.
Yeah, I mean, the very quick bird's eye view is when you look at the Hebrew Bible, when you look at the Second Temple literature, what you're going to find, I think, is, and scholars like Daniel Boyarin, which are Jewish scholars, would also can kind of concur with me, that you're going to find multiple figures that occupy the divine name Yahweh. So the question is basically going to be, well, how is it the case that, there's only going to be one figure named Yahweh when there's multiple figures that are named Yahweh, but you're only worshiping one God? And so you're going to see places like, Genesis, where in Sodom and Gomorrah it says Yahweh rained down fire, sulfur and fire from Yahweh out of heaven. And so you have this Yahweh from Yahweh kind of argument happening right there. And you find tons of these places. Genesis 15, the word of the Lord comes before Abram, and Abram calls him by the divine name. And so the basic idea is, hey, if this word of the Lord figure is distinct from Yahweh, why is Abram calling him by the divine name? And there's going to be tons of places like this. And then in the Second Temple period, you'll see people like Philo talk about, the second God, the Δεύτερος Theos that he would call, and he seems to believe in these two distinct figures, but he calls them both God, and he's a Shema-bound Jew. You can see other places as well, like in the Targums, where this is occurring a little bit more radically, I would argue as well. And I would argue then that the New Testament applies this language to Jesus in certain ways, and from hence on, what you end up finding is you get to Nicaea, which will be a propositionalized form of some of the devotional commitments that are unpacked. That's the bird's eye view. I like Jake said, there's a lot of nuance there. Jake's gonna have a lot of nuance that I'm assuming your position's not gonna come out in a 90-second pitch, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just give my kind of a summary of my position, and then we can kind of interact, if that's fine. So my view is certainly I'm aware of the scholarship by people, it's not only Christians, to be clear, Jewish scholarship from people like Boyarin and Siegel and all these different people who have been writing on the topic of two powers in heaven. And I would just say from the outset, I think it would be foolish to attempt to dispute all of that scholarship and say that no Jews existed who believed in this second power in heaven or anything akin to that. That's certainly not my position. So I accept all of that, most of what they have to say, and the historical count of Jews in the Second Temple period and even before that who had similar beliefs. I think the point where we diverge is, I think that, and we might spend a lot of time, trying to really hammer down on definitions and terms, and that's fine. But I'm more so concerned with the meaning and the content behind the terminology rather than, strictly looking at very specific terms. And so I would say that in content and the meaning behind the beliefs that people like Philo, or even in the Christian early Christian period, people like Justin and others, I don't think it's congruent with later Nicene, what I'll call Nicene orthodoxy. And what I mean by that is not just the terms of them using, one nature, three persons, or one substance, three persons, not just in terms of terminology, but in terms of their actual belief and the content behind their statements. So I hate to kind of simplify it this way, but if I had to simplify it, I would say that many of the figures that Than mentioned in his video, or that he would have in mind as holding to this theology, I would say are subordinationists, and not just in a functional sense or in a sense of their role within the Trinity, but in an actual ontological sense. And that plays out differently in different authors, but that's kind of basically my position. So I think where Than and I might diverge, or where we would disagree, and I think it's important to discuss, is whether or not these people were Trinitarians just without the name or without certain vocabulary, and they basically believed in the same thing, or did they believe that the second or third power was actually ontologically subordinate in a serious way to the first power, or the first God. So that's kind of a summary of where I'm at. I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, there's a lot of places to start here. I mean, okay, so I think we can cut to this part because to me, the most important part is going to be right. What do the scriptures teach? What are the implicit devotional commitments that the communities that produce these texts believe? And a lot of that stuff is not going to be propositionalized, so to speak, right? So what I mean by that is, for instance, like even Boyarin will say that he doesn't really want to use this ontological um, functional distinction when he's talking about this period of time, because that just does not exist before Nicaea at the end of the day. So I'm going to have trouble with importing that type of language into what the devotional practices and commitments are of Jews and early Christians in the Second Temple period. So is that going to be one of those things that you disagree with Boyarin on, about that distinction not actually being there? What's going on there?
You mean the distinction not being there, that that vocabulary is not used, or that there aren't different beliefs that fit that?
Well, I would so this isn't just, it's not a question that's being asked, right? So Boyarin in his book, The Jewish Gospels, when he's talking about this topic, he says that the ontological and functional distinction is not a thing at this time. So he's actually taking that away from his vocabulary as he's talking about subordinationism. And subordinationism is just a word that refers to the functional sense end of the day. Like he chooses to use it in that way.
I guess I would disagree with the way that you're explaining it, but I'm not really sure that that's Bjorn's actual view, because he, in another passage which I had mentioned to you, he explicitly says that logos theology, and in that context, he's referring to the logos theology of people like Justin Martyr and those in that era, would be considered heretical according to Nicene orthodoxy. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, so you're talking about the orthodoxy crucifies the logos passage from his.
Yeah. Let me just read it here. It's this is in Borderlines, and it's on. I'm just pulling it up, so just give me a second. It's on page 139, and it says, in an astonishing convergence, however, Nicene orthodoxy also effectively crucifies the logos. While not ceasing to speak of the logos, in the move to a Trinitarian theology within which the entire Trinity is both self-contained and fully transcendent, Athanasius and his fellows insist that God alone, without a mediator, without an angel, without a logos, is the creator. Logos theology is ultimately as thoroughly rejected within Nicene Christianity as within Orthodox rabbinism. So, and I had mentioned that to you before, that basically I hold the same position insofar as I understand Boyarin in this passage, is that logos theology, like I said, I'm not going to deny that that doesn't exist. It clearly exists in the 1st and 2nd century. Amongst some Christian authors and some Jewish authors. However, its logos theology is not consistent with Nicene or later Nicene Christianity. And he doesn't mean just here in the sense of vocabulary or not using certain terminology. He's talking about in terms of actual content, because prior to that, he's going through the beliefs of Justin Martyr and others. And actually, in the footnote to the text, he references another text here. He doesn't mention the page, but it's the book is called "Begotten, Not Made."
Yep.
And I don't know if you've read that. It's by Virginia.
I have.
Okay. And in that text, it's very clear what her position is in reference to this question. So on page 34. She says, with the assertion of the absolute difference of deity and the accompanying suppression of the subordinationist logos Christologies that had prevailed in the pre-Nicene era, divine sonship became the site for the articulation of culture's triumphant subsuming of nature. So I think, although he doesn't mention the page number in the specific passage, I think that Boyarin has things like that in mind from her work. I think she's pretty clear about what is being meant there by subordinationist, and it's not just in a mere functional sense.
Right. So now here's the question. What is the way that Boyarin, how does Boyarin define not subordinationism, that logos theology? Because he does this earlier in the book, right? And he says logos theology, in the sense in which I use it here, is constituted by several variations of the doctrine that between God and the world, there is a second divine entity, God's word, the logos, or God's wisdom, who mediates between the fully transcendent Godhead and the material world. This doctrine was widely held by the Jews in the pre-Christian era, and after the beginnings of Christianity was widely held and widely contested in Christian circles. And by the 4th century, Jews who held such a doctrine and Christians who rejected it were defined as neither Jews nor Christians, but heretics. So it does get
What
pushed
page
out.
is that on, by the way? I don't know if you have the page.
I have a PDF version of it. It's one of those things where it's not giving you the actual page number, if you know.
Okay.
PDFs are. I'll add this in too. I emailed Boyarin just in case too, because you said that I misrepresented him too. So I emailed him. I gave him my script. I gave him a bunch of extra notes with it too, just to make sure. And I can forward you the email if you want. But he even said that I have represented him well and understood his positions very well as well. On top of that, so. But
in terms of what exactly?
I know you're referring to
what's that?
He looked through everything. He looked through everything that I was saying in my script, and on top of that, some extra notes that I had all together, and looked at the argument that I made in whole.
Yeah, so I think you were reading logos theology in the sense in which I use it here. That's where you started, right?
For what are you talking about?
The quote you just read.
Yeah, this is from Boyarin again.
Yeah,
Borderlines.
Okay. Yeah, I see it there.
Yeah. So now the question is, especially with Burr, the book that he cites, Begotten Not Made, the question is not whether or not this is subordination simpliciter, right? That's not the thing that we really should care about. The thing that we should care about is whether or not this is ontological subordinationism, such that it's not consistent with the Nicene grammar. Now, on top of that, one of the things I just want to say is I think this is neither here nor there, right? Like I know this matters to you, but it seems peripheral to me. Because at the end of the
Boyarin's position specifically?
No, I'm talking about what this logos theology is at the end of the day. Because when I'm looking at the Hebrew scriptures, I'm seeing places where the word of the Lord is constituted as Yahweh.
Real quick, guys. Just some people in the live chat said they're not sure if they're following you. Can one of you define logos theology, or just so we have a basis so the audience can follow better?
I think Fan just tried to from Boyarin, but I don't know. I guess they didn't get it.
Yeah,
that's literally what you read the quote on.
Yeah, so briefly speaking, here's the not nuanced version of it. Logos theology would say that there is a transcendent figure that's known as God, and then there's a second figure that's known as God. That would be the immanent figure, right? And this immanent figure plays a mediatorial role from the fully transcendent God for the material world.
Okay. I hope that you guys help that, because I just saw.
Are you happy with that, Jake?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So you were mentioning about the scripture side of things.
Yeah, so when I'm looking at the scriptures, when I'm looking at the Second Temple literature, when I'm looking at especially the Targums, right? I have a hard time looking at these and thinking that these Second Temple Jews are thinking of anything resembling ontological subordinationism. For one, just because these are not questions they're asking at the time, right? And for two, it would seem unthinkable to think that you're going to replace the divine name with a creature at the end of the day.
Okay, so this is the part that I guess presented as they weren't using this terminology and it wasn't even a thought to them regarding the ontological versus functional distinction, then I'm wondering how you would be able to say one way or another on your view.
Yeah,
Because
and this is
seems
no,
like-
this is sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it seems like to me, you're trying to make the claim that it is functional subordination and not ontological. And if they weren't answering asking that question or even attempting to answer it, then how would you be able to say one way or another?
Yeah, I think I think that you can just point to the devotional practices. So the basic idea is like, hey, look, in modern day Christianity, people are not thinking about ontology when they have a belief in the Trinity, but their devotional practices, right? And their liturgies, their worship, their doxologies, stuff like that. These are the things that are going to tell us more likely than not what they're implicitly devoted to or what they're implicitly committed to. But these are going to be beliefs that they're just not explicitly propositionalized, right? And you've seen it before already. Anytime you ask a Christian that hasn't really thought about these things, you ask them what the Trinity is, you're going to get a bunch, like you put 30 Christians in a room that have never thought about this, never asked this question, but they still implicitly, devotionally believe that there's one God and there's three figures they know as this one God. That if you ask them a question about how to articulate this, they're going to sound heretical. They're probably going to sound like modalists. They're probably going to sound like subordinationists. They're probably going to sound like tritheists, right? Because they just they haven't thought about it. It's not been articulated.
Yeah.
So they're not asking the question, but you do look at the Second Temple period and the devotional practices and the literary glosses that happen are just more consistent with the idea that these people saw these other figures as identified with Yahweh or identified as Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. So then you're not making the claim, or it's not your position, that we can't, based upon their work and or their writings and what they said, that we can't make an educated guess or make an argument based upon their text for one position or the other. You're allowing for the possibility to make an argument for either ontological or mere functional subordination, correct?
Right. The data that I'm talking about that has to be considered, though, is going to be the data that's going to be. Let me rephrase that. The data that we have to work with is data that happens in a time period where this distinction between ontological subordination and subordinationism and functional subordinationism is just not a category. But what we can infer from so basically from there, what I can infer is I can look at, for instance, if you're familiar with the Targums, which if you've read Boyarin in them, I'm assuming you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can look at the Targums, and for instance, actually Boyarin points this out too. But you can look at Targum Neophiti, Exodus 3:14, and it reads like this. Basically, it says, and the Memra, so Memra is the Aramaic form of, for anybody curious, the Targums are Aramaic paraphrases of the Old Testament. These are Jewish in nature. In Exodus 3:14 of the Targum, it says, and the Memra, which is the Aramaic form of the Greek logos, right? The Memra of the Lord said to Moses, he who said, Bereshit, which is in the beginning, like come forth, to the world from me in the beginning, be there, and it was there, and who is to say, I am that I am, to be there, and it will be there. And he said, thus you shall say to the Israelites, he has sent me to you. Okay, so what's happening here is you have the I am that I am, the divine name here, to the world from the beginning, right? What's happening here is that has been glossed by a reference to Genesis 1, right? That's the creative, let there be. The Memra, who is the Logos, is identified as the very word God spoke at creation. He who said it to the world, be there. And then what happens is the created world is then presented as a distinct, the creative word, is now represented as a distinct divine being. I am my Memra, will be there with you. But simultaneously, now you have I am, that divine name. It's revealed itself to Moses in the thing that is saying I am is the creative word in the beginning of Genesis. So the basic idea here is there is this conglomeration, this condension between two distinct figures who are the I am. And of this, interestingly enough, on page 259, Boyarin has a
I'm listening, by the way. I'm just going to get a book. I'm just listening.
No, you're good. Boyarin even says about this, the memra is separate from, and he actually uses the word homoousios with God. So Boyarin says this is an example of being separate from, but homoousios with God, homoousios being of the same substance. There's so many examples of this in the Targums. These are Jewish in nature, and the basic idea is why, again, how are you, if the second figure is distinct from, subordinate to, or anything other than Yahweh, this is just terribly hard to make sense of.
There's so much there. I mean, I disagree. I think that if people who are familiar with the literature read all of these different early figures, like Philo, like Justin Martyr, all of these different figures, you'll see that it's much more nuanced, I think, than you're portraying. Because, for example, many of the things, pretty much everything you said regarding the Targum there can be applied to somebody like Justin Martyr. He believes in a pre-existent word. He believes that the word participates in creating the world. He believes that the word and son is the God who appeared in the Old Testament and said all of these different things, and was the one who spoke to the patriarchs and the prophets in the Old Testament. However, he believes in two different, in my view, he believes in two different divine beings. He believes the Father alone is the Most High God, and the Son is not the Most High God. In fact, he explicitly says that he's not the Most High God in chapter 60 of his dialogue with Trypho. So it's just, to me, as somebody who and I'm not like trying to pat myself in the back, but as somebody who has read a lot of this literature, yes, it seems very glaring, like, wow, these are shocking statements that somebody would make. But when you actually read them thoroughly and in more detail, you'll see that just merely believing in a pre-existent word or a pre-existent son, and believing that this word or son took part in creation and is called God and is sometimes attributed with the Hebrew name of God, you're thinking, wow, well, that's enough, right? They basically believe that the second power is co-equal, co-eternal, although you're not using that word's terminology, but in terms of content, is co-equal, co-eternal to the Father. And that's just not true. We just know from reading people like Justin, people like Philo, people like Tertullian, who you also mentioned in your video, we just know that that's not true by looking at their work in more detail. So what I would like to do is I would like to actually look at some of these figures and their writings and see what they actually said. And then maybe I just don't understand it, and you can help me interpret some of these passages better. But I just think it totally conflicts with what you're saying.
Yeah, my problem there, Jake, is you just said I disagree with what I said about the Targum, and then move to Justin Martyr. Right? What, like Justin Martyr?
No, I'm saying all of that is consistent. All of that language is still consistent with somebody who believes in ontological subordinationism. That's what my point was.
How is that consistent with ontological subordinationism?
Okay. As I think I was just explaining before, you can believe in a word or a son or a pre-existent figure who is called God. And
no, not just called God, identified as Yahweh.
Yeah. Same thing. We have that in all these different writers. That's what I'm trying to say.
So you can be an ontological subordinationist and say Yahweh is a created being.
If you believe Yahweh is a created being, of course you're a subordinationist.
I mean, sorry, let me rephrase this. So you can, like, what you're telling me is that the community that produces the Palestinian Targums, right? They're identifying are you saying this community, these Jews, they're worshiping a second God that's created?
I don't know where in the passage did it say that they were worshiping it.
There are tons of passages in the Targums where there's temples dedicated to the Memra, there's prayers offered to the Memra, there are there's tons of this. I can find you examples.
So the assumption is that only the Most High God is worshipped. Correct?
Yes, that's consistent with Jewish monotheism. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that that's not true. We see all different sorts of figures being worshipped. For example, as I mentioned, even within Christianity, Justin Martyr's son, the word figure, is worshipped.
I'm talking about in the Second Temple period, Jews, not like we can have debates about the ante-Nicene fathers all day, right? But what I'm more interested in is what is happening in the Second Temple period with Jews who have a strong commitment to the Shema, and they're very sensitive to idolatry, worshiping false gods, all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to replace the divine name with this figure's name such that their text now reads that this figure has temples dedicated to him, that there's worship dedicated, prayer dedicated to him? He is the one that's walking in the garden in Genesis. You get the point. Like, make that make sense to me.
That's what I keep trying to do. That's how I'm responding. But you don't like me going to somebody like Justin, or
how does what Justin is doing reflect what like Jews prior to Christianity are doing?
Because Justin is falling in line with that prior tradition. So we can go to somebody like Philo if you want. I mean, he's somebody who's living during that time.
Wait. So yeah, Justin is using a prior tradition, but that's just, it sounds like Dan McClellan now, but that's presupposing univocality, right? That whatever Justin is saying is exactly the same, and there's no differentiation. Well, so just because Justin uses and inherits this tradition, right, doesn't mean that he's doing the same exact thing in the same exact way as the Second Temple Jews are. Justin Martyr, right, is inheriting also a philosophical tradition, and he's trying to unpack certain things, right? These Second Temple Jews, I think it's much more revealing what's happening because they don't have these things that they're trying to figure out. The things that Second Temple Jews care about is, we don't have a functioning temple anymore. Is the Shekinah with us or not? How do we obey Torah? Stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. The things they're concerned about is Torah obedience, and there's some sectarian stuff happening, right? But at the end of the day, the thing they care about is their Jewish identity. And that Jewish identity is rooted in this idea that you do not worship anything but Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. So is somebody like Philo better for you to look at?
Well, I'm focused on the Targums right now, the community that did the Targums. Like, if you want to, like, are you just going to, let's put it this way, are you happy just conceding that in the Targums we have proto-Trinitarian ideas, the concepts, the building blocks are there?
No. I'm trying to explain to you that everything that you mentioned is consistent with an ontological subordinationist position. And the way that I'm trying to prove that is by going to other authors at the same time period who use exact same terminology, explain everything in the same way that you have, and at the same time, they're subordinationists.
Again, what I'm asking you is, do you think, because Philo's like Philo, we can talk to Philo, we can talk about Philo. But I'm asking
he was mentioned in your video so many times, wasn't he? Several times.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about Philo, but I'm talking about the Targums right now. Like, Boyarin, for goodness sake, is using the word homousios here about this too, right? So to me, it just seems very, very difficult to explain how, like, if anything, I have a really hard time thinking how any Jew in the Second Temple period would be happy worshiping a created subordinate being and replacing the divine name. Like, think about all the other times a Jew in the past did that, what happened?
You're asking me the question?
Yeah. Like, what's the
What
predominant
happened?
sin of ancient Israel?
Yeah, idolatry.
Right. So if this is the thing, if this is the thing that's important, if Israel's past is tainted by idolatry so much, such that they're bound to the Shema as a result, right? This is the identification, the boundary marking of Israel. In what, like, to me, the prior probability that they're going to worship at
your view, though. That's
what?
evidence against your view, because you're trying to make it seem like the Jews were just these strict monotheists and they wouldn't fall into worshiping other than the Most High God. But in fact, you're giving positive evidence that that's always been their history.
No, because we have a control case when they do worship false gods, right? The community lashes back against them. There's people speaking against them. It's seen as a bad thing, right? And then all of a sudden, magically, in the Second Temple period, it's accepted. That's what you're asking me.
But wasn't it criticized as well by other Jews?
Not until, I would say, I would agree with Segal and Boyarin. This was like the majority, if probably the majority view at the time. And it's post 70 AD, once Rabbinic Judaism gets to pick who's in control, right? And what the theology is. Once they start hereticizing this two powers theology, that they're starting to criticize it.
So it wasn't criticized. When was the first time you think it was criticized by Jews?
The first time that we can really like point it down to is in the post 70 AD period, probably around the time that Justin Martyr's around. If I'm going to go with what Segal and like Boyarin are going to say, yeah.
So post 70, I mean, but that's still pretty early, isn't it?
Right, but this is the Second Temple period that I'm talking about. The Targums.
Right, and that's when it's being criticized, isn't it?
No, the post 70 AD and onward, right, is the onset of what's technically called like Rabbinic Judaism, right? The Second Temple period ends. The Second Temple period ends at 70 AD.
Right. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's right there. It's right in around the same time period.
Right. Okay. So let me add more context. The destruction of the temple happens, right? And on top of that, you have the Bar Kokhba revolt that further solidifies these tensions between the Romans, the Jews, and the Christians. And that further solidifies this idea that we have to react to this two powers theology that's coming up, right? I mean, are you disagreeing with Segal and Boyarin too, that this was just the predominant view in the Second Temple period? I mean, what does this timeline look like? Yeah, no, that the initiation of the anathematization of the two powers view.
That it took place at that time. That's what your question is.
Yeah, well, when are you placing the initiation?
No, you're saying, do I agree with them on their account of when it started to be anathematized? Is that your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The Palestinian Targums date prior, right? The traditions that date prior to the onset of Christianity.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So these are not things that are being actively criticized, at least that we have evidence for, at this time.
At the time of the Targums, when they were initially written.
Right. Prior to the onset of Christianity, the Targums are what's being used, right? And they're not being criticized. This Memra theology is not being criticized. And it's in fact even carried into the Talmud. And slowly but surely, you can find instances where, again, Boyarin points this out, this Memra theology starts getting actively suppressed. You still find remnants of it. And then as the Talmud and Rabbinic Judaism keeps progressing forward, you're going to actually find them realizing that the way they're reinterpreting some passages and they're reinterpreting the Memra theologies leads them into modalism. So the point is, this doesn't happen until all of this meaning Christianity, this idea that Jesus is part of this divine identity in some way, shape, or form, right? All of this is after the Palestinian Targums are floating around, and you have this tradition that Mike, did you change my name? Sorry, that really threw me off.
Sorry, I'll put you back.
As I'm talking, I'm like, wait. Sorry.
What does that mean?
I have no
Thanos.
clue.
It's OS. Thanos. His name is Than. I added the OS.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so basically the Targums are prior to Christianity. This is their tradition that's floating around, and they're replacing the divine name with the Memra. And in places like Exodus, that Exodus passage that I told you about, there's a literary smashing, right, between the divine name, the Memra, such that the Memra is distinct, but it's also the I am.
Mhm.
So the question is, hey, we can talk about all the anti-Nicene stuff, but when it comes to the Targums, I think these are going to be some of the places where we have some of the most, I would argue, definitive pieces of data that point to the idea that the devotional liturgical practices of the Second Temple Jews saw that there were multiple figures that are the I am, right?
Mm-hmm. So you think the worship is the same? That's what you're trying to argue?
They literally replace. So I can pull up passages here.
I'm just saying because from what I've read from people like Hurtado who focus on early worship during this Christian Jewish period, he doesn't seem to be holding the same view. So it wasn't my understanding that the worship was to the same level as the devotion that was later given to Jesus, for example.
Hold on, I'm trying to find where is this? Yeah, no, you're talking about Hurtado's. Are you talking about Hurtado's One Lord book, or the early Christian devotion to Jesus book?
Second one.
Gotcha.
I mean, I have both.
No. So when I'm talking about the worship of the Memra, I'm talking about, again, the text itself has the temples being dedicated to the Memra, right? To the Jew, to the Second Temple Jew, are we dedicating temples to anything other than Yahweh?
I would say yes.
In a way that's seen as normatively okay.
Yes, by some Jews at the time, yes.
What Jews at the time are okay with saying you're dedicating a temple to a created figure?
Apparently, the ones who wrote the Targums that you're speaking about.
Well, that's just a little circular, right? Because we have this whole entire tradition. You don't worship false gods. You only worship Yahweh. Anytime that a Jew goes and worships a god other than Yahweh, it's met with some sort of animosity, right? A declaration that this is not okay. It's sin. This is a breaking of the Shema, right? And at this point in the Second Temple period, especially with the rising tensions in their own identity, because again, the prophecies have ceased. We have all these problems. They're awaiting the Messiah to come, right? They are fighting about what it means to even properly observe the Torah at this point, because they're getting so strict. They're trying to do the absolute best they can. This is what they care about. If any Jews are going to care about this more than ever now, it's going to be the Second Temple Jews, because they see themselves in the exile and they want to be free. These are the people that have an astounding amount of motivation to not worship a false god. And what you're telling me to believe here is that they're just going to go and worship a subordinate created being, and a whole community is okay with this. We have utter silence from everybody about this, and this is just okay.
I'm saying that there's two things going on. Some people may have been viewing this, I would call, intermediate being as giving it some type of veneration and worship that was not due or to the same degree as the Most High God. And even if I grant for the sake of argument that they did do that, then yeah, it would just be idolatry. But it doesn't really change anything from my point of view. My point of view is I want to know how these texts were being interpreted by Jews and then obviously later by Christians at that time. And from what I'm reading from the scholarship, and I could be totally wrong, I'm happy to admit that, it doesn't seem that the worship that was being given to any second person, second being, or whatever was anything like what was later given to Jesus. That's my understanding of it.
So this is okay.
I mean, this is what Hurtado says.
Right, but hold on. I'm talking about the memra of the Lord right now, right? We can talk about the veneration of Jesus and all this other stuff. But well, you really haven't, because what's happening here is I'm pointing to the idea that the thing that makes the most sense, right, of this data.
Most sense to you.
Okay, well, in what world does this make sense other than just presupposing that a whole entire community is going to be okay with it? Because for me, I'm arguing, hey, there are multiple figures that are seen as Yahweh, but are distinct from each other. And there's a unique tradition where this happens amidst a tradition of Jews worshiping false gods, but this distinct figure, the word of the Lord, who was being identified as Yahweh, this has never been seen as a bad thing throughout this whole entire tradition. There's a continuity from the Hebrew Bible into the Second Temple period, right? To me, this seems like the categories are in place for what we find in Nicene Trinitarianism, right?
Right.
Do you agree or disagree with that?
I disagree, and I'm just gonna. I mean, we're kind of spinning in circles here at this point, but what scholar actually holds the opinion that you just said?
I literally just cited Boyarin on this.
But you're just now okay. So now you're making the claim that Boyarin believes that the Jews in that Second Temple period believed in this second power, this memra of the Lord, and elevated him to the same status, and that he was required the same worship as the Most High God. Everything that is involved in Nicene Trinitarianism in terms of content and belief at the time, all of that is there, and there's no difference between that and Nicene Trinitarianism. And that's what you think Boyarin believes?
You inserted a lot into what I said. I cited Boyarin talking about that Exodus passage where Boyarin himself glosses the Exodus passage, saying that the memra is homoousios with the I am. Boyarin, okay. So Boyarin takes this to be of the same substance language, basically.
Okay, let me ask it this way. Does Boyarin think that there's anything different from the Second Temple period that we're discussing now, and how the Jews viewed the memra, or whoever the second figure is, versus how Christians of the Nicene period viewed Christ?
Yeah, I think what Boyarin would probably say is that you can't really compare the two in terms of the grammar and the distinctions in the Nicene faith. But what you can do is see the conceptual building blocks and the devotional patterns in the commitments, the religious commitments, right? So I think Boyarin, so another way, or another thing that Boyarin does is he says that there's a operational theology at the time that is consistent with the operational theology of Nicene Trinitarianism, right? But the thing is, they don't have a representational theology because they're not explicating anything in the way that Nicene Trinitarianism is explicating.
Okay. So let me try to understand what your position is. In terms of Christianity, do you believe that Trinitarianism, and this is just a way of putting it, do you believe that Trinitarianism sprang out of this two powers in heaven theology?
I would say that Trinitarianism is going to be the final product of like propositionalizing these implicit devotional and religious commitments that the Second Temple Jews had and that the early Christians inherited.
Okay, so I mean, I think you're basically saying yes to that question. So
I'm adding nuance to that, right? Because the way like human psychology works is we have these implicit religious devotional practices, we have these commitments, right? But the process of explicating these things through a linguistic media, right, requires the tools to do so, the rational thought capacity to do so, philosophy, all these other things, right?
Mhm.
And like stuff like that gets messy. So that's why I'm focusing on the implicit devotional and religious commitments that are the core conceptual building blocks, right, of the Second Temple period. So by those lights, this is what we have in the Second Temple period, and this is what the Hebrew Scriptures attest to. I don't see anything in the Hebrew Scriptures that is inconsistent with Nicene Trinitarianism. And like, if we want to say that the Trinity is a later development that's inconsistent with it, I need to find something that's contradictory to the Nicene faith, to the Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah. So, but I'm trying to remove that layer, because if we just go to Bible verses and going back and forth on what this passage of the Bible said, then, it's not really going to get anywhere.
Why would we want to wait? So why are we removing the Bible from the Nicene faith when the Nicene faith is going to be like?
I don't think you're understanding the point. The level of analysis that I'm attempting to do at this point is not by me as an individual coming to the biblical text and saying, what does the Bible mean here? That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm looking at other earlier figures, whether in the Christian or Jewish, and analyzing their statements and what they said to how they interpreted the Bible.
Right.
Those are two different things.
Those are two different things. And the thing that's most important is what the Hebrew Scriptures are teaching. This is the thing, right?
Yes.
This is the thing that these early communities have inherited, right? Then the ante-Nicene fathers, like I said, that's a whole nother mess that we can talk about, right? But they're inheriting something. They're inheriting something. They're inheriting something that is inherently not at odds, right, with the Hebrew Scriptures and the predominant doctrinal religious commitments that are implicit within the Hebrew Scriptures and the communities that produce them.
Right. And I'm saying Boyarin says the exact opposite.
What?
I'm saying
Boyarin will say that Boyarin would say that Nicaea is one of the natural outpourings of what we find in the two powers idea. Where do you find the idea that Boyarin says there's a contradiction between the two power stuff in the Hebrew Scriptures and Nicaea?
I just read the passage earlier.
But he's also talking about a logos theology where he insists there's no ontological subordinationism because you can't inject that into.
Okay, if there's no ontological subordinationism, then why does he say logos theology is ultimately as thoroughly rejected within Nicene Christianity as within Orthodox rabbinism?
Why does he say it? Do you know why he says it? Well, yeah, but do you know why he says it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
I've been arguing why he has the whole time.
So why? What is it? What is it that he says that is exiled from Christianity into the anchor? Right? He
explains it in the passage. He says Nicene orthodoxy also effectively crucifies the logos. What does he mean by that? While not ceasing to speak of the logos, because of course it still has that there. This is my added words. In the move to a Trinitarian theology, what is the move? Within which the entire Trinity is both self-contained and fully transcendent.
Right there. That's the thing.
Athanasius and his fellows insist that God alone, without a mediator, without an angel, without a logos, is the creator. So that's the thing that's different now, is that before this logos was an intermediary divine figure. He was not self-contained within a part of the Trinity and the Most High God.
Great. So one of the philosophical aspects to the logos theology was this transcendence immanence language. And what is it that Athanasius is worried about with this transcendence immanence language? Because Boyarin says it himself, right? Now the Trinity's self-contained. There is no need for this transcendence immanence, right? But Athanasius is not worried about this transcendence immanence per se. What is he worried about?
What do you mean he's not worried about it?
Well, he what is he taught? Why is Athanasius, right? Why is Athanasius
He just mentions
saying
Athanasius because he's part of Nicaea. That's why he's
right?
mentioning
And then so Boyarin mentions Athanasius. What is it that Athanasius says about the Logos theology, this transcendence immanence language?
I don't know what you have in mind. I don't know what you're asking.
He warns, right? He warns that this is that the Arians are using this as a means to argue for Arianism. So there's two things happening. One is now we don't need this transcendence immanence language because we can have the Trinity self-contained. God is transcendent. And on top of this, now that we don't need this transcendence immanence language, we have the Arians over here, and we don't want to give them any room. So let's just get rid of this. So it's not the logos. So yeah, well, so it's not that the Logos theology was seen as ontological subordinationism, right? They just don't want to give the Arians any room to work with, and they have no need for the transcendence immanence language anyway, because as Boyarin says, now the Trinity is self-contained. There's no need for this transcendence immanence stuff. So it's not that Boyarin thinks that the Logos theology is ontological subordinationism, right?
Okay, so if I email him, because we can't do this now, but if I email him and I ask him that specific question and ask him to explain what he means by this quote, and he says, yes, that I do believe that Logos theology was fundamentally ontological subordinationist, Justin Martyr was a subordinationist, and that's what he means by that quote, then what would you say?
I would say bring Boyarin onto this and we can debate that. Bring up Boyarin onto IP and we can talk about it.
Okay,
I'd be fine
I'm happy
with that.
to do
You could
that.
always
Yeah,
bring him on for an interview and talk to him.
I'm happy to do that, and I can guarantee you that he does not agree with you on this topic. But
well, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I'm happy to hash it out with him.
I want to look at other texts and other people. I mean, we're just kind of been talking about the same point this whole time now.
Well, if your whole point is that Logos theology is ontological subordinationism, Boyarin says this out loud, right? But
I want to try to demonstrate that. That's my point.
But Logos theology is in all-encompassing thing. I'm not saying you're not going to find places in the ante-Nicene church where people are going to have subordinationist language, or even some people are going to be ontological subordinationists. But what I'm saying is the inherited tradition of Second Temple Judaism is inherently consistent with Nicene Trinitarianism. The way that what you need to do is find a way to block that continuity by showing that there is no way at all that anybody interpreted ever this two powers theology as anything but ontological subordinationism.
Right. But I'm saying the way to do that is to look at the texts and the authors that we have available and see what they actually said. Right. But when you're claiming that you can fully grant that there were some ante-Nicene fathers that held to ontological subordinationist positions, can you name a single one?
I mean, I'm not going to say that Origen was an ontological subordinationist in an Arian sense, right? But Origen's weird, right? He has that graded divinity thing happening or whatever, right? But that's, again, neither here nor there, right? That's just the ante-Nicene messy process.
I'm trying to get what your idea of history is. If you don't think that there were any ante-Nicene fathers that held to ontological subordinationism, and you're basically saying that the Second Temple Jewish period, which you're saying is the majority position at the time, they held this view, and then I'm trying to see the historical trajectory. You're saying that obviously the Christians then possessed the New Testament. This is after the time of Christ now, so they have their own, flavor and spin on it, but they're essentially doing and saying the same thing. They're just filling it in with Christian language and specific Christian worship practices and liturgy and so on and so forth. So that seems to me to be what you're trying to say. And in that case, there really are no, ontological subordinationist ante-Nicene fathers. That seems to me what you're saying.
How does that follow at all? I'm talking about the Second Temple Jews, the community that produced the Targums, right? They're saying things that can only be understood within the religious context, not only best understood within the religious context as these multiple figures that are all known with the divine identity, right? Not in a philosophical way, right? But in terms of their religious commitments, right? Multiple figures known as Yahweh, but you only worship one God.
Yeah.
That is that consistent with Nicene Trinitarianism?
In the way that you're expressing it, yeah.
Well, this would be the devotional expression and commitment of the Second Temple Jews.
Yeah.
What happens from this? What happens from this? But what happens from this starting implicit point, right, and onward? That's just explaining a historical model of who said what and when did they say this and how do they react into this and yada yada yada, right? The fundamental building blocks themselves, of which this springs forth from, right, is not inconsistent with it. That's why I'm saying we can have a debate about who says what in the ante-Nicene church, right? But fundamentally,
we're not just second.
Say what?
We're not just talking about the church. We're talking about the early Jews too. I mentioned Philo, who you mentioned in your video several times.
Right, but look, I could grant, just for sake of discussion, that Philo was a subordinationist.
But do you believe that? I don't think you do.
I don't think he was. But even if he was, it doesn't matter, because the Hebrew scriptures in the Targums themselves, right? And the Targums themselves are showing a religious commitment that there are multiple figures of each who are known as Yahweh.
Yes, I understand that, Tham, but what you're missing, the whole point is, I'm looking at the additional layer of Jews in terms of their practice and their writings, how they interpreted the Bible, and then how they interpreted the Targums and all of that. You're just trying to look at the Targums and the biblical texts, themselves. That's what I'm saying. We're doing two different things. You're trying to look at the Targums and the biblical texts themselves. I'm trying to look at somebody like, as an example, somebody like Philo, okay, who existed in that period, who you mentioned in your video. I'm not saying that to throw it at you. I'm just trying to say,
I get it. Keep going.
Okay, so I'm trying to look at, okay, well, Philo is an example. He's somebody who you mentioned in the video. How did he interpret those texts? And how do we know that? Not just by going back and looking at the biblical text itself or the Targums. We look at his texts and see what he said and how he interpreted that. Because what we're just doing now is Than is saying, oh, well, I'm looking at these biblical texts and I'm looking at these Targums, and I just don't see any other way to interpret it this way. And I'm saying, well, yeah, I do see a different way to interpret this way. And here's evidence. Philo is interpreting the passages in a different way. And this is what he's saying. And I believe that his position is consistent with my thesis and not yours.
So let me just thought experiment. Let's just say we talk about Philo, and we come to the conclusion that Philo was an ontological subordinationist.
Yeah.
How does that get you to everybody else is an ontological subordinationist?
That's a good point, right? So, and I have a section, not to do a shameless plug, but I have a section in my book related to this because basically I'm arguing in my book that not just the Second Temple Jews, I have a short section on that. I'm mainly focusing on ante-Nicene fathers, that the Trinity didn't exist until 700 years later, okay? And one of the ways that I'm doing this is by arguing from silence, in a sense, that nobody had a Trinitarian belief, that it doesn't exist, that there's no one explaining it in this form or fashion. In addition to that, I'm presenting positive evidence from people like Philo, from people like Justin Martyr, all of these different individuals, to show that the positive records that we do have don't actually reflect Nicene Trinitarianism. So on making a probabilistic case, if we have no positive evidence, from my point of view, that supports your thesis, and we have all the people who we're looking at who are major figures during this period as positive evidence against that thesis, well, then that's good reason to think that this wasn't their actual belief.
Right. Okay. So one thing, okay. So are you saying that there's just no like evidence for the Trinity in the New Testament? Like what's happening there? Because you said I have no evidence. I pointed to really strong evidence, a continuity of these things in the New Testament. I remember you in your debate with Nick, for instance, you said something about the New Testament with the New Testament data, the Trinity is more probable. So is the data that you're going to?
I didn't say that. The Trinity is more probable than what?
I have hold on. It's in my notes here. Here.
Is more probable than what?
So you said and it was like in a super chat question. You said, and I'll throw a bone and say that I think that the Trinity is more probable on the New Testament than partialism or modalism. It's 1 hour.
That I believe, yeah.
Okay, great. So we do have evidence then for the Trinity, right? We have tons of it, right? So wait. How is the Trinity not more how is the Trinity more probable given the New Testament than modalism or Sabellianism? Then how are you saying that and then saying we don't have evidence for the Trinity?
I'll explain why. Because I think that there, and some Muslims might not like this, but I don't care because it's not really my style.
I respect that about you, Jake, by the way. I really do. I love that about you.
Yeah, I'll just say, like, there's some Muslims that want to make the Bible say exactly whatever they think Islam teaches. And I don't believe that. I think that the Bible and, the Quran contradict each other in several important parts. So that's never been my kind of method. And because of that, I don't think that the theology of the New Testament is exactly like the Quran. I'm coming to your point, but what I'll say and what I mean by that is, I think there are a number of places in the New Testament. Scholars differ about this, and I'm not a scholar of the Bible. I'm not claiming to be, but scholars differ about this. But I think a positive case could be made where the term God or theos is applied to Jesus or Christ in a handful of places. I accept that. I don't have a problem with that being the case. And because of that, but yet it's so clear to me, and I think you guys would agree with this, it's so clear to anyone who's reading the text, right, other than some strange oneness Pentecostals, which I don't know how they do this. It's so clear to anyone who's reading the New Testament text that whoever Jesus is and whoever the Father is, or whoever the Father is and whoever the Son is, they're not the same person. So that's as clear as day to me. Mm-hmm. Whoever the Father and Son are in the New Testament, whether you say that the Father is fully God and the Son is divine in a lesser sense, or he's fully God, whatever. But what is clearest to me is the Father and Son are two different individuals. They are not the same person. They commune with one another. They speak to one another. The Son prays to the Father. And I'm not using that to say that therefore he can't be God. But I'm just saying that's what I mean, is that you have at least a handful of cases where I think a Christian could argue that Christ is called God or theos in some sense in the New Testament. And if you couple that with, well, he's very clearly not the Father, well, then now you have two options. Either a full-blown binitarianism, just for the sake of argument, in a Nicene sense, or you have Arianism or some type of subordinationist view where Jesus is called God and is divine or God in some sense, but yet he's not co-equal, co-eternal with the Father. And I'm saying both of those views are more probable given the data than modalism, because it's the most obviously false position given the fact that Christ and the Father are clearly two different persons. So that's what I mean by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I do. The thing I'm just highlighting is it sounds like you're agreeing then that there is strong Trinitarian evidence, right? in the New Testament.
Okay, no. I'm saying that there's strong evidence that modalism is false, and that it's much more probable the Trinitarian or Arian hypothesis. However, if I weigh those out, if I weigh those two,
okay, so you're saying
against each
Trinitarianism
other,
and Arianism are the two competing theories on the New Testament.
yeah, or I mean, you can argue for a form of Unitarianism where there's no pre-existent son, and he's a son by adoption, that kind of thing. But all three of those positions are much more probable than modalism. However, if you go into those three, I would not say that Trinitarianism is more probable than the other two readings. But that would take a lot of argument and defense needed to be made on my part, and that's not really what we're supposed to be doing in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, well, the New Testament data, I would say, actually doesn't use the two powers language too, right? So like we have,
it does or does not?
I would say it does, and it applies it to Jesus, right? So because like we got Jesus claiming to be the Son of Man who comes in the clouds of heaven, that argument that you saw in the video, right? I mean,
yeah, Daniel 7.
Yes, we have the Daniel 7 passage. We have the fact that that Son of Man, the Aramaic, is like a human one, right? But he's riding on the clouds. We have this motif where it's Yahweh only that does that. So Jesus claiming to be that Yahweh figure, that second Yahweh figure. That seems.
I get you. I get what you're saying. It's just that I think, and maybe this is my fault, I don't know. I hate to keep kind of bring up this point, but I think it's kind of where we're just going in two different directions. Mm-hmm. Is that you are much more concerned with looking at what the text of the Bible actually says, and I'm trying to avoid that, because my whole project is, and this is something I don't like about both Muslims and Christians in these dialogues, and that's what I'm trying to avoid in my book, is that I don't want to say, look, here's the text and here's Jake's tafsir or exegesis of the text. I just like, no offense, Mike, I don't really give a damn about Mike's exegesis or tafsir of the Quran. It's just irrelevant. What I want to see is,
I don't care about half the stuff Mike says half the time anyway.
Well, I agree, but nevertheless, the point is, though, is that in my opinion, what Christians and Muslims should be doing is not just as an argument from authority, but if you really respect the tradition that you're coming from, Michael should be going to, oh, what did At-Tabari say about this verse? Or what did Ibn Kathir say about this verse? Or and likewise, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say, look, Mike can quote John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Oh, look, see, the Son is God, and that's it. And then Jake's going to turn around and say, what about John 17:3? The same author says, well, speaking to the Father, he's the only true God. And then, it's this constant back and forth about what this biblical passage means to Mike as a Christian versus me as a Muslim. And then it's the same thing now happening with the Islamic dilemma. Don't worry, Mike, I'm going to get ready for you. So, it's just the same thing. But why I feel as though that I don't like when Michael or other Christians do that with the Quran. So I'm not trying to do that with the Bible. I don't want to give Jake's exegesis or explanation of the Bible. In fact, I'm not even confident in my own explanation of the Bible to do that to begin with, because I'm not a scholar of the Bible. So what I'm trying to do in my book that I'm working on now, and my research is, I'm trying to remove that layer. Basically, my argument is this, okay? My argument is that if Jesus and his early righteous companions or disciples and the Bible clearly teach the doctrine of the Trinity, then we should expect to find Trinitarians or early Trinitarian beliefs within early Christianity. Would you agree with that first premise?
No, actually, I don't.
You don't. So you don't
No.
agree that
not explicitly, because I think if you look at how cognitive science of religion works, how psychology of religion works, how sociology of knowledge works, like a bunch of different domains, right? You're actually probably shouldn't expect to see those explications up until the point that you see pressure to answer certain questions happen, right? So like sociologists will call this like a pressure activation model. And the basic idea is like you have these doctrinal commitments, and these doctrinal commitments are going to be implicit. They're going to manifest through devotional means, but they're rarely going to manifest through linguistic media. And the basic idea is,
wouldn't you agree there were those pressures in early Christianity?
Yeah, but the question is, what pressures are there, right? The predominant, because notice the predominant thing that happens first in the early church is what? What's the predominant struggle?
What do you mean?
Sabellianism, right?
Yeah. Well, so
right?
I mean, I told you this before. My view is that there are a variety of Christologies in early Christianity, and I'm saying that none of them are actually commensurate with Trinitarianism. You have Sabellianism or modalism. You have a subordinationist type Christology where Jesus is God or divine in some sense, but not anything similar to co-equal, co-eternal with the Father, which I would argue most of the ante-Nicene fathers fall under that category. And then you have a third category of, a mere man Christology of people like the Ebionites or others that Justin Martyr even acknowledges in his own dialogue. So those are the three Christologies, and Trinitarianism is nowhere to be found. That's my argument.
Right. But what I'm saying is Trinitarianism, as in the grammar, the explicit grammar that you see in Nicene Trinitarianism, the need to explicate and announce co-equal, co-eternal, all this other stuff, right? That need does not come around until the pressure to explicate and the tools to explicate are there. So your argument from silence is actually going to be evidence in favor for the idea that the implicit devotional practices that these people have and the religious commitments they have are Trinitarian. I mean, just think about the modern Western Christian, right? They're going to have this devotional commitment to the Trinity, and none of them are ever going to be able to explicate things in Nicene grammar, right? Yeah, and they're not going to care to until somebody comes up to them like you, who knows how to argue against the Trinity metaphysically, right? And then they're gonna get stomped by you on that topic, right? Because you're good at that. And then what's gonna end up happening is they're gonna go, well, I just said a bunch of stuff that sounded really heretical. And now imagine that you take away the internet, you take away these philosophical tools that are going to be immediately available to them, all this other stuff. They're going to struggle. It's going to take time until they realize how to take out this implicit doctrinal commitment they have and bring it out. And all I'm trying to say is this argument that you're making has to remove this foundational layer of this devotional practice, this devotional commitment, this religious commitment, and then just judge people judge the ante-Nicene church by grammar and struggles that if you bring in cognitive science, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but then that's why I'm saying you have to couple both of them together, right? Because there's an argument from silence, but then in addition to that, there's positive evidence that's being examined. For example, just as an example, you don't have to agree with it, but if I go through Justin Martyr and I'm going through his text, and I'm not just saying, look, see, he doesn't say homoousion, therefore he's not Nicene. I mean, that
I'm not taking your argument to be
but I'm saying in addition to him not mentioning things that I think in some cases we would expect him to mention, in addition to that, he mentions things that explicitly contradict Nicene Trinitarianism. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's where more of the weight is of the argument. It's not just the argument from silence. It's the positive evidence from these authors who are they're not like saying things that are kind of compatible with Nicene Trinitarianism, and then other places you're like, oh, but he didn't say this, but he also didn't contradict it. No, he did explicitly contradict it in other places. That's what I'm arguing. That's what my argument is.
Okay, so I'm not going to try to bludgeon you with some of the cognitive science stuff, because I'm not, like, if you're just not familiar with that stuff, then that's okay. I can send you stuff on this topic if you want, because this stuff is extremely important. Because the argument from silence thing, right? Like, for instance, just on the silence part of it, I certainly you wouldn't say something like this. The fact that there's let's just say 90% of Christians worldwide, probably more, don't know how to explicate or explain their Trinitarian commitment in a Nicene compatible way, right? So does that mean that 90% of humanity not speaking or explicating this is evidence that those people, that 90% of humanity that are Christians, are not Trinitarians?
No, but the key difference that you're missing is that in my examination, I'm not focusing on lay Christians. I'm focusing on the educated, what we would call ulama, the educated scholars within the early Christian community, not just James, your neighbor from down the street. You know, we're looking at those who are supposed to be the intellectual forebearers of the faith. What are they saying? And if they don't get it, then who the hell would?
So, like, Justin Martyr by your lights is a scholar kind of sitting in a university, or what?
No, he's educated in philosophy and the Christian traditions, and he's trying to explain what he sees as correct.
Right, but what's the other context here? Because Justin Martyr, right, there's a reason why he's called Justin Martyr. He knows eventually what's going to happen to him. This is in the early church where there's external pressures, not just to do theology proper and sit in his armchair, right?
Yeah.
There's external pressures that are life and death scenarios and all this other stuff. And he's speaking to a Jew, I think, if you're going to talk about the dialogue with Trypho, right? And he's trying to appeal to Trypho and the previous traditions that they've inherited.
Right.
The problem is, though, again, I know tons of educated people that are going to flounder on how to articulate the Trinity, right? And also, again, the psychology aspect of this is unpacking this implicit doctrinal commitment. And at the end of the day, again, we can argue about the Nicene Fathers, but also am worried, like, if you want to say something like, we're going to remove this foundational layer, right? And then go to the later communities and then look at instability in those communities, right? I'm worried that, like, that's just going to undercut a lot of other things. Like, wouldn't that also just kind of hurt the idea that, well, let's put it this way. Like, do you think that the Quran teaches that the Quran is the uncreated speech of Allah?
Yeah.
Okay. So then there's a contradiction in Islamic history with that, right? With the Caliph in around like 830, right? He imposes through state sanctions that the Quran is created. And then he has the Islamic scholars say, this is what's happening. And then there's sorry if I mispronounced the name, Ibn Hanbal or something, I think it is.
Ahmed,
yeah, sorry. And he's the only one that resists, right?
Yeah.
And then the 20 years after that, the state sanction gets reversed.
Well, he's not, just to clarify, he's not the only one that resists, but he was the major figure, yes.
Yeah. He's the guy that's like accredited. Yeah, major figure. So the question is like, okay, well, we see tons of stuff happening there. And then the question is like, well, we don't have the Prophet Muhammad speaking of the uncreated speech of Allah this way. I don't think we have any of his companions saying this, right? And so the question is, like, we have some silence here. We have a state sanction that contradicts this position that I think most authorities are going to hold to. And then we go back to this uncreated speech position. So the basic idea is like, well, I'm not going to impose this standard on you, Jake, right? Like, I think that'd be unreasonable, that I'm going to trace your history and go, well, this idea that the uncreated speech of Allah is an invention that's philosophical or something like that. I think,
but there's a big difference between an example you're giving. And actually, I do mention this in my book, and I do make a comparison to Islamic teachings. And I would actually argue that, yes, and first of all, I'm a Salafi Muslim, so that's my belief. If I don't believe that I can find clear examples of my theology in the early community, then I don't accept it. That's part of my analysis. And so the difference, though, in your case is, yes, I'm not arguing that there weren't beliefs in early Islamic culture or societies that contradict mine. There certainly were. And there were all different sorts of beliefs that, contradict what I believe to be orthodoxy. However, at the same time, you do have orthodoxy. You have what I believe is the orthodox position. And then you have this caliph who is trying to put forward a position which I believe is heterodox. That's not the case. I'm saying my argument is that that's not the case. I'm not just saying that, because modalists existed in the first 3 centuries and, people who believed that Jesus was just merely human and not divine, that therefore that in and of itself means that there were no Trinitarians. No, I'm saying in addition to that, you don't have, in my view, you don't have Trinitarians opposing that. But in your example, you have what I believe is the orthodox position and a heterodox position, and they're arguing with each other. So that's why.
But then was the orthodox position present?
Yes. It was present prior to that. I mean, we could do. I actually love that topic. We could come on and
that would be a cool topic. But nonetheless, right?
Show that it existed much earlier than, for example, Imam Ahmed or anyone that you're thinking of. Yeah, I can show. Right. I can demonstrate that very clearly.
So,
and if I believe to be consistent. If I couldn't, then you would have an argument against me, and that's why I say in my book, for example. If a Christian were able to show that in the first 3 centuries of Islam that Tawheed did not exist, that none of the major scholars believed in it, Imam Ahmed, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Abu Hanifa, all of the different what we call great imams or scholars of our tradition, if none of them believed in something in the first 300 years, then that would count as good evidence that we shouldn't believe in it either, because if none of them believed in it and they were teaching the religion and nobody just happened to come up with this or understand it, I'm not saying that there can't be any development whatsoever, but if we're talking about who we're supposed to worship and who we're not, and whether or not there's 3 persons or 1 person in the Godhead, these are very important questions that if nobody is saying that, just for the sake of argument, in the first 300 years, for example, if Michael Jones, with his I'm sorry to say, the goofy outfit he wears and goes back on his whiteboard there, and he
are you talking about his shake house outfit?
I agree. It's a goofy outfit. Thank you. Yeah, I agree.
Oh my gosh. Jake, if it means anything to you, I'm sick. I'm like, my gosh, I know another one of those videos, man.
There's a lot more
cringe,
coming.
Mike. It is cringe. But anyway, look, and if you want some better,
we got more common ground between us, Jake. Mike is great.
Yeah, look, Mike, if you want some good Islamic clothing, something better that's more stylish than that, I can send you some rockin' stuff, because that Khaliji style is not too good. But anyway,
listen, I agree. It's kind of uncomfortable. But just real quick, how much further do you guys want to go before we get to some Q&A?
I'm just going to close out here.
Jake, if you want to have the last word, go ahead, man.
Well, no, what I think is we should get last words from both of you. So, like, if you want to go, Jake, you want to go? I'm fine with that. Like, maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just wanting to close out on this point, and then we can kind of make our final statement. I'll be quick. So, what I'm saying is, I actually do think that would be good evidence. Like if Michael came up with his goofy outfit and was able to prove that somehow none of the Muslims in the first 300 years believed in Tawheed or believed in Allah, in that he's the only one worthy of worship, and whatever, minimal requirements we want to put on that. If he was able to show that, I would say, damn, Mike, that really shook my faith, because I would say, nobody's really explaining what I believe on these fundamental matters in the first 300 years. That seems problematic. In addition to that, if Mike were able to show, for example, all you see are these caliphs who are putting forward a doctrine which is heretical. It's not just that Imam Ahmed didn't exist and he's silent. He's actually showing all these other people have a heterodox view. Well, yeah, that would, to me, would be positive evidence against my belief. And I would say, wow, I really have to consider that. So I'm perfectly fine putting Islam under the same expectations. But if you want to give like a final statement, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, man. I actually am really happy that this happened, because this was actually just a fun conversation. It wasn't a bunch of it wasn't like two guys just throwing a bunch of poop at each other and rhetoric maxing each other. So that was actually really enjoyable. I really want to thank you for that. Just
no problem.
Right now. That being said, so it sounds like you and I have just an utter disagreement on framing the question in of itself.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah,
and so and look, I get that. So what I'm just going to say closing for this is just the framing of the question on your end is just, I think it's untenable, mainly just because once you understand how religious devotional practices work, once religious commitments work, and then once you look at some of the texts in the Second Temple period and then go into the ante-Nicene church, well, as soon as you have this foundation to work off of, this inference that there is no compatibility with this two powers thing to Nicaea, it just doesn't work, because you need to get rid of that foundation. But I don't see a way to get rid of that in a way that's principled, in a way that doesn't like lead to bad examples and doesn't lead you to especially having to deny how different experts in several different fields of cognitive science, in linguistics and all this other stuff, are going to talk about how people work. At the end of the day, for me, I see the text of the Hebrew Bible, I see the text of the Targums, I see the text that produces a lot of these really weird things, and I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of weird stuff in the ante-Nicene church, but to talk about that without first setting the foundation, I think, is putting the cart before the horse, right? And so for me, I'm looking at the text. I see multiple figures that are known as Yahweh in a community that is only supposed to worship one God, and every single time that they go and worship a false god, it's a bad thing, except for this one time. That seems to me like a text in a community that is committed to the idea that these figures that are known as Yahweh are just going to be constituted within this referent that is Yahweh. So there's a weird distinction that they don't know how to explain. They don't care to explain it. And for them, that's just the way things are. So yeah, I think I'll just leave it there. Like, yeah.
I think it was an important conversation, because I think we definitely
you gave me stuff
definitely
to think
have
about
a different
too.
framing. We definitely, I think that's the key thing that came up, and I wasn't trying to be repetitive to just for the sake of it, but I think that's kind of like the most important thing, is that I agree with you. There's an initial layer. Like, I'm not disputing that. Mm-hmm. There's an initial layer, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to come at it from a different angle. And I'm saying, how do we interpret that initial layer? And I'm trying to go to the second layer and see how they interpreted the first layer. And in virtue of that, that's kind of how I'm looking at it, right? And it's not like an all or nothing, like, oh, Justin Martyr said this one thing, so he has to be correct and he couldn't possibly be wrong about this one specific thing. No, but I'm taking the whole second layer, right? And I'm saying, well, in toto, and what is like the majority and how most people are interpreting this foundational layer. And then I'm saying, well, if they don't know better than me, then we're in a lot of trouble. And I'm thinking that they're going to interpret that foundational layer better than me. And I'm not like using any, or I try not to use any sources that are completely against the Christian tradition and what Christians would accept as genuinely acceptable sources. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. That's my project. Maybe some people think it's wrong-headed, but I'm completely aware of that. I'm saying that I think too much time has been spent by Muslims and Christians, and not just Muslims, but let's say Trinitarians and skeptics of the Trinity, whether they're Christian, atheists, or otherwise. I think too much time has been spent on the actual biblical text rather than the second layer, which is supposed to be analyzing that biblical text in that first layer. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, and I think that it's just a different approach or a different way of looking at it. If I could give just one very quick, small example to that, and not to make it like a big point out of it or anything, but like, for example, I was actually working on my chapter on Tertullian earlier today. And in my view, and I think that this is the mainstream scholarship's view, is that Tertullian was a corporealist. He believed that God had a body, and that he had this position most probably because he was influenced by Stoic philosophy. And if I'm reading that and I'm reading the primary source, which is Tertullian, I'm saying, wow, I mean, he very clearly just said that God has a body, and he sounds like he's saying that God is corporeal and all these kind of things. Well, now I don't want to just say, oh, that's just Jake's interpretation of it. I go to St. Augustine, who's a giant in the church, and I read him, and he interprets Tertullian in the exact same way and basically chides him and criticizes him for saying that God has a body. So to me, I'm not saying that Augustine can't be wrong and he's infallible, but I'm using that as good evidence for my interpretation of Tertullian. I'm just trying to explain to you what I mean by these different layers and how I'm using different scholars to interpret each other. So, because I don't want to, I don't think there's too much new under the sun. That's my view. And because of that, I'm not trying to come up with a unique hypothesis and book here that's like, oh, Jake Brancatella's musings on the New Testament and the ante-Nicene fathers. No, I'm trying to present what I think is standard modern scholarship along with what, the primary sources actually say from the church fathers. So anyway, sorry for rambling, but I just want to kind of give an example for where I'm coming from, that I'm not just going to say, oh, Tertullian said this is Jake's opinion. No, I'm going to bring modern scholars to show that I'm interpreting correctly. And if I can, give other earlier Christian scholars like Augustine to back up my interpretation and say, yeah, he is saying this. So anyway.
Yep. Let's get to some super chats here. If either of you guys need to take off, I'll just go through them. It's perfectly fine.
I'll hold out, and I'm going to bed.
Distracting Game says, Jake, what convinced you to become a Muslim?
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's a long question, question to answer. But in short, I essentially was always a Muslim, but I never knew it. I don't mean in the simplistic way. I was raised Christian, but I'm not Catholic. But I'm not one of those people that claim like, oh yeah, I was a born again Christian and I was so into the religion and all of that. No, I kind of always believed in God, but certain fundamental things in Christianity never made sense to me. And when I read the Quran for the first time, it cleared up a lot of things and basically confirmed or explicated what I already inherently believed in, that there being one God and many prophets, but none of them are God and that sort of thing. So I know it's a kind of simple answer, but that's as long and short of it.
That's fine. Yeah. Randy says, Jake, thanks for being willing to debate ideas. Absolutely. Phil says Trinity is late for first. Yeah, I know.
On the Muslim Christian side. So
yeah, I agree with you there. Phil says Trinity is late, so First Clement and Didache are late. That's what he says. If you guys want to comment on that, but that's kind of going against what you. Yeah, it's kind of going what you said about exegesing, the exegetical tradition of the text, I think is what,
Yeah, so I mean, in my book, I actually and covering, and that's like I'm not covering any books in the New Testament. I'm covering everything but the Bible. That's kind of what I'm doing. And so because of that, I do cover texts like First Clement and the Didache, and I think they're extremely important to look at to see what's the Christology that's in them. Can we get anything out of them? And I think some Muslims and Christians will be surprised what I say about a lot of that. But yeah, I think it is important to see what they have to say.
Yeah. Apollo says, as I pointed out at last DebateCon, the evidence for high Christology is so strong. If the Trinity is false, Jesus would still be God. Really glad Jake is honestly debating now. Though verse backing out of previous debates years ago. I'm not sure what that's in reference to.
Yeah, I don't know. I would agree that, and that's what I said, actually, it might surprise people. I think that there is a quote, although I don't like the high versus low Christology because I think we can get more specific. But to use that term, I think there is a very high Christology early on. I would agree with that 100%, and that you do have very early non-canonical text and authors who do present Jesus as God and divine and pre-existent in some sense. And many of the positive accolades that or attributes that Than would give from the Targums and these other things, I fully accept that. And I think that there is a very high Christology pretty early on. I just think it comes short of the Trinity.
Let's see. Oh, I saw this earlier. Richard Carrier's Pigeon says, the Trinity is like a dot with one property. No, actually, it's like a bubble with three properties, which proves nothing, created everything. This is true. This is what he said in my debate with him on Does God Exist? God is a bubble. No, he's a dot with one property, no three properties. And that proves nothing, created everything. If you guys didn't see
I'm not familiar with that, but that sounds very strange.
Yeah, Mike and Richard Carrier had a debate, and it was atheism versus theism, and Carrier's hypothesis that he thinks is more probable than theism is that there is a nothing state, and that because nothing means there's no logical contradictions, that entails everything, and so that somehow that means reality.
Yeah, that's
but it's not that. Then he changed it to a dot with one property, then a bubble with three properties, and it just kept going downhill. It was insane.
Yeah, no, that's weird.
Jake, even though we disagree, respect to you for having these discussions with Christians. I pray for your health and hope you meet the true God, the Christ.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I just do want to comment on that. I wish that there could be more conversations like this. I think for a lot of reasons there aren't, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, I wish that there were.
I agree with that.
Question for Jake. This is from Lame Apologetics. Jake, why do you interpret First Apology chapter 6 as Jesus being an archetype of an angel?
Maybe he's referring to something that I said in the past. I don't know, but I don't recall that. I don't interpret Jesus as being an archetype of an angel based upon that passage. I think that's the passage that seems like there's angelic worship involved. Is that it? I think that's the one.
Oh wait, is this the passage where Justin is kind of sloppy with his Greek and he says something like, "We give worship to the Lord Jesus Christ," blah blah blah, and then he introduces another clause and he says, "and to the angels," right?
Yeah. Chapter 6 of the First Apology. No, that says there's nothing in here about worship. It looks like.
Okay, wait, I don't know.
Wait a minute. I'll just read it. It says but both him and the Son who came forth from him and taught us these things, and the host of the other good angels who follow and are made like him, and the prophetic spirit we worship and adore, knowing them in reason and truth, declaring without grudging to everyone. Okay, so there's
that's the passage we were both thinking of. Yeah, I don't use that to say that he's an archetype of an angel. I accept that the term angel for Justin, I think, is primarily a functional term. So it's a messenger. So Jesus is an angel in the sense that he's a messenger of God and that he does the will of the Father. But I don't think that he's of the same kind angel in the way that, some people may be thinking. That's not my view.
Okay. Spicy question, and You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but it says, Jake, in my experience, every Dawa guy is a pathological liar with that information. Why should we believe anything you say?
Wait, before you answer, Jake, Jake didn't lie once during this conversation that at least I could pick up on.
Yeah, I could be wrong about certain things, but I wasn't lying anyway. But yeah.
Thank you, Randy. To both, do you guys both affirm John 17:3? Well, I do. Yes.
Yeah. See, that's what I mean.
Yeah, but it's like, what does John 17:3 mean?
17:3, you know. But I don't know what that means. Do I think Jesus said it? Maybe. I don't know.
To be honest, I don't understand Jake's core hypothesis and how it predicts the data without auxiliaries.
Okay. I mean, I guess you're going to have to read my book then and try to understand it. But basically, my core hypothesis is that if the Trinity was clearly taught by Jesus, his early righteous followers, and key emphasis is clearly and explicitly taught by Jesus, his early followers, and the Bible, then we would expect to find early Trinitarians. We don't find early Trinitarians, therefore, most likely Jesus, the Bible, and his early followers didn't teach the Trinity. That's the argument. But yeah, I think I have positive evidence as well that shows that. I can't hear you. I don't know if it's on my end.
That was my fault. I muted. Apollo says consistent with subordinationism equals possible but improbable. For Jake, if Jews could worship a guy other than God, then what was the boundary for worship?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question about worship in the ancient period. And for us, it's very difficult to see how anyone could offer some degree of worship to another being. But interestingly enough, even many Unitarian Christians would accept that they worship Christ. But they don't mean the same thing by that Than and Michael would when they say that they worship Christ. So I think the term worship is a very flexible term, and that requires a lot greater analysis.
Mr. Anderson says, what about scripture hinting at three-person/spirit being incorrect, such as Peter asking to build 3 tabernacles, John portraying in Revelation casting 3 unclean spirits being cast out of the dragon beast false prophet?
Is that a question for me, I'm assuming?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that the scripture does teach that, actually. I think that when you look through the Hebrew scriptures, you see this same kind of pattern of the collapsing of different figures with the divine identity happening in a few different places. So with the Holy Spirit, in Genesis, Joseph is interpreting dreams, and it's by the Ruach Elohim that he can do that. That's the Spirit of the Lord, it's the Holy Spirit. And basically, Joseph is able to interpret dreams. The Pharaoh asks him, who is this man who can interpret dreams? And notice what ends up happening is Joseph goes, it's not I that can do it. And then he uses the divine name. But the problem is he knows, the text says he's doing it by the Ruach Elohim. And then he says it's by God that he can do it. So now you can find places like that throughout the Hebrew Bible, and in the New Testament, I would argue you find a continuity with this blurring of the lines of the identity of the Spirit and the divine identity.
It's a comment for Jake. It says, I feel like the most Jake is showing is that Jews were just subordinationists and Christians are the ones bringing that back to monotheism.
Okay. I mean, if that's what you feel, I can't say anything else, but my position is that the sort of logos theology or 2 powers in heaven view is inherently subordinationist, and I think that's true for both early Jews and Christians. So I don't know what you mean by getting back to monotheism.
Apollo said Nicaea versus Logos difference is verbosity, not Christology. Church versus Logos. Jews is different because the amount of titles applied is more, not greater kind.
Yeah, I disagree. I think
laughing at the grammar of the super chat.
Yeah, I think I think that's the key thing, and where even Michael and I have gone back and forth in videos on this thing. I think the Trinitarians are trying to say, oh, it's just a difference in language and vocabulary. You can't expect this sort of Nicene anachronism of using the same terms in the same way back then. And I'm saying, no, it's not just a difference in vocabulary. It's actually a difference in belief. And that's what I really wanted to get down further with Than on, because that's the same thing that you keep stressing. It's like you keep stressing that it's just a difference in vocabulary and language and certain categories that weren't used at the time. And I'm saying, no, it's more than that. But what I want to get down to further is, how do we actually judge whether it's more than that? How do we actually judge whether or not it is more than just a difference in language?
Distracting Games is back for another spicy comment. He says, Jake, you accuse Mike of misrepresenting Quran and tafsirs, yet the people who lie about and misrepresent both all the time have all been Muslims. There isn't a legitimate case for Islam. So you can answer that or not.
I don't think I really accused Michael of misrepresenting Quran and tafsir. If I remember correctly, my primary point was, I don't really care what Mike's tafsir of anything is, unless he demonstrates some familiarity with the text and language, or he actually appeals to authentic scholarship that I would accept. That's what I said.
Let's see. He has another one. Jake, what does the Quran say the Trinity is? Perhaps you should have an argument against what the Quran says the Trinity is, as that is the version of the Trinity what Muhammad opposed.
I think the Quran does not accept any form of the Trinity.
All right. Here, comment, I guess. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of man, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. Colossians 2 verses 8-9 discuss.
I don't know what he's trying to say. I don't think we've been using too much philosophy in this conversation.
I think what he's trying to think is this Colossians 2 has the fullness of deity dwells in him. And so they want you to discuss that specifically. Yeah,
I think it's a strong passage to bring up as evidence that Jesus is divine. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say, but
would you say that's consistent with a Jewish monotheistic belief? Or would you say that's pushing towards like some sort of like polytheistic subordination, as he's a different God?
I think it's underdetermined. I think it could go either way, but I can see, and that's what I'm sensitive to, I can see why a Trinitarian would read that passage and say, look, Jesus is fully divine, and he's certainly different. As I said before, he's certainly different than whatever he is. He's certainly different person than the Father. So, wow, I mean, it kind of looks like you have some type of binitarian idea here. I'm sympathetic to that reading, and I don't think it's completely ridiculous.
Well, I appreciate that.
Based.
I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he says, I appreciate Jake coming on to talk, but clearly Than through the whole thing when he didn't just state his case and then flexed. You should have just, flexed. Come on.
I wore a sweatshirt for a reason. Jake, people always make fun of me because shirts fit really tightly on me. That's all that's happening here.
Oh, okay.
Come on. Distracting Games is back. He's got two here, so I'm going to read both of them. Jake, if I came off as accusatory, I apologize. I don't mean that you in particular are lying, only that given that every other Muslim apologist and polemicist has lied nearly constantly. Examples are Muhammad Ajab, Zakir Naik, and Nadir Ahmed, etc. He also adds, I come from a Mormon background, which gave me the predisposition to trust possible holy texts. I also read the Quran and found it to be lacking in divinity, but to be demonic in nature. The Quran convinced me that Islam and Mormonism are both false. So he wanted to clarify that stuff.
I mean, that's fine. I think that there's a lot of people lying on both sides. Nadir Ahmed, I think he needs to just go somewhere in hiding and just stop talking. Zakir Naik isn't really very active anymore, but I don't find much of his material relevant today. And Muhammad Hijab needs to, he has a lot of problems. That's another story.
That's a whole can of worms.
Yeah,
there.
I'm not gonna make you. We're not gonna.
Oh no, we're not gonna talk about his fantasies of me. Definitely. But what does Jake think of Athenagoras? I always forget how to pronounce the name. I think that's right. Athenagoras.
Athenagoras, okay, yeah. I think that he was a typical, what I would call, or what scholars call, two-stage logos theorist. So he is somebody who believed that the word, you can say, was eternal, in the sense that it's sort of like an attribute, something within God. And then at the moment prior to creation, God emits this word, and that's the second stage in which he exists outside of God. And then he's sort of a conduit by which God creates everything else. So that's my view of Athenagoras. I think I can back that up with text. I've got them in front of me, but I don't want to waste too much time. And I think that's a pretty standard view, actually, amongst the second century apologists.
He says, Jake, couldn't it be that Justin says two gods because the theological language was just nuanced early on?
It could be, if it was just only that. But if you analyze his entire corpus of writings, I think it becomes clear that it's much more than that, that it's not only that, because he explicitly says, for example, a very striking passage in Dialogue with Trypho, chapter 60. He not only says that he's another God, he says it another way. He says, it will not be the Most High God who appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he explicitly says he's not the Most High God. So I don't see how you can interpret that another way.
You don't think that can just fall in the nuanced language of him referring to the Father there?
No, because if you have two gods, in his language, you have two gods, Father and Son, and then you look at Justin's explanation, which I think is extremely important. If you look at Justin's explanation in many of these early church fathers and writers as to why they explain that these Old Testament appearances are the Son rather than the Father. Modern Trinitarianism will tell you that it's just based upon the choice or the free will within the Trinity, that they decided that the Son appeared rather than the Father. But if you look at what Justin Martyr says, and what pretty much all of these early authors say who talk about these Christophanies, it's not just based upon an arbitrary willing within the Trinity that the Son appears rather than the Father. It's much more than that. It's as if the Father literally doesn't have the ability to become incarnate. And that's just incommensurate with later Trinitarianism. So I think when you analyze the reasoning why Justin is calling him another God and assuring you that it can't be the Father who was seen, I think the picture becomes clearer.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That I think that's a really interesting point, because maybe that's something to hash out more, even just privately if you want to, Jake, because I think where you and I are at odds there is you're reading that Logos theology of the transcendence and immanence thing as subordinationist, and then Athanasius is reading this not as subordinationism, but as a tool that the Arians can use, and this is why we're getting rid of it. I think, there's a lot of complicated stuff there. We can hash it out over text or something if you want.
Yeah, one thing on Athanasius, and just actually was writing on it earlier. If you're familiar, one of the most quoted passages is in the early Christian church is Proverbs chapter 8, which talks about God's wisdom, right?
Yep.
And from my research, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, most of the early church fathers quote that in reference to the wisdom being the pre-existent Word or Son. Would you agree with that?
A lot do. And then are you going to point at the fact of what the Hebrew word means in the Septuagint? Okay.
No. I mean, that people can do that on their own. But what I'm going to point to is that Athanasius, in his time, the Arians use that passage, Proverbs 8, to try to prove that, okay, if you believe that this is about the Son, then, as you said, the word there portrays the figure as created, and therefore the Arians were using that as a proof text.
Yeah, what was the verse again?
Athanasius responds.
What?
Athanasius, to me, his response is interesting. He responds and says, no, Proverbs 8, obviously I'm paraphrasing, but the gist of it is Proverbs 8 does not refer to his pre-existent generation. It actually refers to the economy and to the incarnation. And his reasoning for that is to show that the Arians can't use that text to prove that Jesus is, or the Son is created. And if he didn't believe that actually had force, then he wouldn't have to go to that route. So he's actually kind of conceding that the apparent of the text is that whatever that's talking about is referring to creation. And therefore he has to say that it actually refers to the incarnation and not this eternal generation.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff happening with that. The Septuagint renders it with the Greek word for create. And that's just because there isn't like a word available at the time to probably get across anything else other than that. In the Hebrew, the word is, I'm trying to find it right now. Here it is. In the Hebrew, if you pull up the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, there's a huge section just talking about how underdeterminate this word is. And it's incredibly difficult. Like, they actually allow for this idea of it being begettenness and weird stuff, producing stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. See, but that's the thing. What I would be interested in, and not to say that that's not interesting to look at what that lexicon says and all that, but I'm kind of looking at how did the early church interpret it, right? Did they use the Septuagint rendering, and based upon that, how did they understand that text? And I would argue that they did understand it as a type of creation, and that it seemingly Athanasius was kind of conceding that point because he's saying that it's referring to the incarnation. Well, if it's referring to the incarnation, it has to be denoting creation. So anyway, I mean, it is a very interesting passage. I mean, people should just go and look up and see how the early church fathers, in my opinion, exegeted Proverbs 8. It's very interesting.
You don't have to respond to this if you don't want to. He says, Jake, it really appears that you're more intelligent than your prophet. He argued too, but not great. His arguments were horrible.
Yeah, I'm not going to respond in kind to that. I mean,
as a Christian praying for Jake to get healthy, thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
I think this is the last one. IRT Colossians 2 verses 8-9, emphasis on philosophy as the doctrine of the Trinity is based upon Greek philosophy of God being able to be in the flesh. Thus, 1 John 4 verse 3. I don't know if you guys want to comment.
I don't understand. This Anderson fellow is kind of confusing because he seems like he's at one time he's trying to prove the Trinity, and other time he's, I don't know if you have familiarity with this, but it's hard to interpret which angle he's coming from.
Oh, I know.
I mean,
I think what he's always trying to do is use this Colossians passage and how it's talking about don't be caught to philosophy or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you pay attention to the Colossians passage, it's vain philosophy that Paul is talking about, not just philosophy simpliciter.
See, that's how I interpreted his question the first time. That's why, because he had that like bolded, capitalized philosophy thing. And I'm thinking, yeah, he's really focusing on the philosophy aspect rather than trying to get me to talk about the deity of Christ in that passage. So I don't know, maybe it's God, but he doesn't believe in the Trinity. That could be what he's trying to say. I don't know.
We just got a $100 super chat. I'll read this one. The Trinity, I think, best represents the three omni properties of God. The Father represents God's omniscience. The Son represents God's omnipotence. And the Spirit represents God's omnipresence. Islam runs the pagan fallacy that the human mind can comprehend the nature of God.
Well, I mean, I would let you guys speak on that, but I don't think you would accept that as a orthodox characterization of the Trinity.
Well, so, I would, if I'm going to be charitable, I don't think he's saying that is a Trinity. I think he's just saying they represent these aspects of God's attributes or properties.
I don't think that's correct, right? Each person themselves is all three of those, right? So
as much as I appreciate the super chat, I would agree. I think the Father is omniscient, omnipotence, and omnipresent. I think the Son is omnipresent, the Spirit is omnipresent. So and Mr. Anders. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just don't think it's too helpful for Trinitarians, but he could do whatever he likes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if he wants to elaborate more. Mr. Anderson just wants to clarify he's a non-Trinitarian Christian.
Yeah, I figured.
I think he's scared to say he's a modalist. I think that's what I actually feel, that he's a modalist and he's scared to actually say that. But
he's running.
Sorry, Mr. Anderson, I cannot agree. That is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a non-Trinitarian Christian. Anyway, thanks for coming, Jake. We appreciate it.
You have that view.
I don't think. Yeah, I've been very clear. I don't think there is such a thing as a non-Trinitarian Christian.
Okay. Speaking of that, Mike, I mean, I don't know, just a quick question for you. There's been some controversy online amongst Christians. I don't know if I've seen you do an intra-Christian debate before. Is that something, and I'm not asking you to mention any names, but is that something that you would be up for, even potentially, or you're just not interested in doing anything like that at all?
Not interested, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In the past, I've done things like debating, like, is evolution compatible with Christianity? I think that's the most I really dived into that. And I've kind of been like, all right, I've kind of moved on from that at this point. I just wanted to establish that they're compatible is all I was doing. So that was basically it. But yeah, other than that, no, I don't really want to get into denominational disputes, really, or church disputes. Yeah. Juan says the Trinity is definitely true. The church fathers made me understand it better. The argument of the angel of God from the Old Testament, Jesus said the same thing of the angel of God too.
Okay.
All right. We'll just close it out there. I appreciate you both coming. I have linked Jake's channel below because that is the polite thing to do. So you can check out his stuff if you're interested there. But yeah, thanks for coming, Jake. Anything you want to say before we go?
I think there was a last super chat there saying
tell
you that you're running. Well, actually, yeah, maybe for both of us. For people who don't know, Michael and I are actually supposed to be debating in a couple months. What is it, in July? Towards the end of July. So
July,
yeah, I don't think either of us is running from that. We hopefully will both be there. Yeah, and I like people who, like, I initially put this, and this was not a dig at Than. I think, Michael, when you commented on it, actually, you kind of misunderstood, because Than knows that I have spoken to him privately, and we had mentioned talking about other things in the past that had nothing to do with this. And he was like, oh, I'm not really much into the debates and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. So when I put that post originally about the video, I wasn't trying to take a dig at Than. I was literally saying, I don't think he would really want to do this. So
okay.
Anybody else?
I understand.
Oh yeah.
No, I appreciate you clarifying. Yeah,
that was a genuine, actual comment.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a dig at
my mistake. My mistake. I thought it was a dig, but yeah,
no, it was not. I mean, and then we wound up coming on, and it wasn't really a debate; it's more of a discussion. But yeah, but what I was trying to link that to is Muslims and Christians. Look, not everybody has to debate. Not everybody has to be a debater. It's perfectly fine. People can make their own content how they want. But if you're going to challenge people to debates, and you're going to be braggadocious and, even calling people out by name and acting like you're going to debate them, then just do it, dude. Like, just make it happen. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with people, because I have actually good friends of mine who I respect as Muslims that I think are senior to me in knowledge. And I go to them with questions, but they say, Jake, we're not really good at debating. We're not good at thinking quick on our feet and being witty and things like that. And, there's a lot more to debates than just knowledge. Yeah. So
that's the thing.
I don't have a problem with that at all. But what I have a problem with is if you're going to challenge people to debates and like, yeah, hey, I'm come here at this time and I'm going to debate you here, or, and we have an idea of some people who do these kind of things, then yeah, you should be willing to debate. And if not, then you just kind of make yourself look silly. So yeah, that wasn't a dig at Than or my original comment at all. I just thought that he genuinely wouldn't be interested.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. Totally cool clarifying that. I appreciate it. Apologize for taking that out of context. But anyway,
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, man. We appreciate the conversation. I'm going to close this out and we can all get some sleep here, except for me,
All right.
because
Take
it's
care.
early where I'm at. So I'll talk to you guys later.
All right. Take care.
You made it to the end of this video, which means this message matters to you. If you want to see more content like this reaching people for Christ, you can help make it happen. Your support makes these videos possible. Click the link below and donate today. And if you want to go even deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. You'll get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and a place to connect with others passionate about this mission.